tell you a little bit about the conversation that we're going to have today. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we're going to have the conversation today. And then we're going to get into it. So there's no shortage of capital in this world. We know this because we see these trillion-dollar signs of investment in all kinds of wild shit, not the least of which is all the things. We know all the things. But if you're building something that doesn't fit into the traditional venture model, if you're an underrepresented founder, a fund manager who's trying to deploy in communities that have been overlooked, or someone building something that matters but won't scale at an absurd rate, the system often feels like it was designed for someone else. So we're here today to talk about the different ways that capital can actually be structured and to get into a conversation about how we do that differently. What are even the options ahead of us? And for those of us either seeking or deploying capital, what are the kinds of conversations that we need to be in to ensure that the right kinds of investments are finding the right kinds of projects? We have practitioners sitting at very different points on the stack, and they may not even agree with each other about what alternative even means. And so we're going to get into it. That's the point of this conversation. So what is a fishbowl? So hands up to those who have never seen or been part of a fishbowl conversation before. Hands up, hands up, hands up, hands up. Okay, so basically this is a participatory conversation model. And what that means is we're going to start with we have some invited guests here, and these are very interesting human people. And they are going to begin a bit of a conversation with us to sort of seed and inspire us with some of what their experience has been. But very shortly thereafter, I'm going to invite you to become part of the conversation. So I'm going to sit here at first and have a little chit chat with them, but then I'm going to get up out of this chair. And as soon as a chair in the middle is available, any one of you can choose to come and sit in that chair. And when that happens, someone else who's been in the circle is going to get up and make space. And then someone new can come and join. And someone else will get up and leave. And someone new can come and join. And in that way, we're going to have a sort of rotating cast of folks in this outer circle who are going to collectively contribute to this conversation together. Does that make sense from a logistical standpoint? Okay. So I also want to name a handful of practices that we have found really helps. If we can collectively hold these practices together, it allows us to have the most robust and the most nuanced conversation, even when drinks get spilled. It's okay. It happens. We're great. Okay. Okay, so when we're doing this, we are collectively holding this conversation together. So that means that we need a set of shared practices that we can use. The first one I want to invite us into is listen for understanding and with curiosity. Listen for understanding and with curiosity. What does that mean? It means that we want to be curious, particularly when we hear people offering perspectives that are different from the things that we have experienced in our own lives. That's what allows us to have a robust and nuanced conversation. And we also want to be listening to actually hear and understand what people are saying rather than listening to respond. Does anyone experience that, where you're having a conversation with someone and in your head what you're really doing is like, here's all the things that I have to say that are very smart, right? Instead of doing that, we're inviting you to be like, what are you saying? Let me really see if I can understand it. Listening for understanding, listening with curiosity. The second thing we want to invite you to do is trust the wisdom of the room. And I'm really talking about trusting the conversation that's happening in the center. So you may be sitting on the outside and decide, like, I have a really hot thing that I want to share. I want to share my perspective and come and sit in the circle. But by the time it gets to you, the conversation river may have gone down another path. So I want to invite you, if we're all listening for understanding, to stay with the conversation that's in the middle, to be in whatever is alive at the time that it comes for you to take your turn, even if it's not the reason you sat in the middle in the first place. And in fact, I'd go so far as to say, you don't even have to have something to say to come and join the conversation. You just have to want to be part of it, right? So you can just come on up here, follow what's happening in the conversation, and jump in when the spirit moves you. So that's trust the wisdom of the room. And the third one is take space, make space. And this is really about having awareness of sitting in the center and how long you are there. So this is very literal. You are going to come up and you're going to take space when there's an empty chair, but then you're also going to pay attention to how long you've been in the circle comparatively to others, and make sure that you're making space when it's your turn to leave the mic behind for somebody else. Also, if you just feel complete, like maybe you just want to come in and ask one question, drop the mic and leave, like that's also cool. So we're going to take space, make space. We're going to listen to with curiosity and understanding, and we're going to trust the wisdom of the room. Does that sound like a practices that we can all try to practice together? I just need a little more enthusiasm. Okay, it's fucking 4:15 on a Saturday. We've been doing this for 2 days. All right, good, wonderful, perfect. And all y'all little sitters on the edge here, come on over. Don't be edge sitters. Come and be real. Come into the circle. Come, I see you, Michelle. I see you with your cute heart glasses. Get over here. All right. So, we're ready. We're ready. We're going to do it. We're going to jump in. All right. These wonderful, brilliant people. I'm really excited to have this conversation today. And I'm going to invite you, by way of introduction, to share a little bit about who you are and what you do. And here's the question to start off. And you all can, fight it out with your eyes about who wants to go first. Okay. All right. Each of you works with a different form of capital: venture, philanthropic, catalytic, blended, etc. By way of introduction, can you tell us, what does your particular corner of the capital stack make possible that others do not? And also, where does it fall short? What do you see founders or communities needing that your corner of the capital stack can't provide, maybe? What does yours do that others don't do? What does yours don't do that others do? Okay, you're up.
All right. All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Frederick Gross. A bit of introduction on myself before I answer the question. So I co-run an early-stage venture fund that invests at the seed and Series A, and we'll unpack more of that as we sort of dive into things. But it's a $150 million fund that writes $500,000 up to $6 million checks into the next the next generation of great founders. And so for us, that means Black co-founded businesses, female co-founded businesses, immigrant co-founded businesses, and Latin co-founded businesses. And so that's the day job. And then in my nights and evenings, I masquerade as one of the co-founders of BLCK VC, which is the largest Black venture community in the country, and does a lot of partnership with Latin communities, female-focused communities, to help create more access fundamentally to historical communities that haven't been able to have access to the capital that we're at least supporting. And then in terms of the question, what do we do? Well, the unique thing that we're doing is really coming in at that seed Series A stages. So once a company has some revenue, has gotten off the ground, has sort of started to get real customer traction, and then we provide growth capital to essentially help put gas on the fire to help accelerate those businesses in a fundamentally artificial way. And so we're trying to essentially help a small set of companies out in the world grow really, really quickly to hopefully one day become public. And so it's not alternative. It's actually fundamentally in the mainstream of venture capital, but it's alternative in the sense that we're backing a different set of founders than where the historical capital stack is sort of supported from an ecosystem standpoint. And then in terms of what are we missing? What's wrong? I'd say what's wrong right now in my world still is the fact that below me, if you think about the pre-seed funds or the funds or angels that back inception stage companies, those are struggling in the market today in terms of fundraising, getting their funds off the ground, and then providing capital to those underlying founders. And without that, we don't have an ability to really support, or we have to alter our underwriting model outside of what has historically been the mainstream. And so that's sort of the way we think about it.
I'm going to pass and wrap.
All right, I guess I'll go. My name is Kwamena Aidoo. If you can pronounce Kwamena, you can call me Kwam. I'm with a fund called Corridor Ventures out of New Orleans. We are an early stage venture capital fund. We invest in local founders solving global problems, but they're based in the U.S. Southeast. Succinctly, I will leave that there. Happy to chat more about it. in thinking about your question, we make it possible for founders, geniuses that are distributed across the country that may not be in the bubbles that typically get capital, we make it more possible for them to get capital. So founders in the Southeast, for example, are they're outraised by their California counterparts by nearly 6-to-1. But we actually have data that shows that they are 50% better at returning capital to investors than their California counterparts. But the data doesn't get talked about because we over-sensationalize the exceptions. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to debunk that myth in a return-oriented fashion while increasing the diversity of the people that get to solve the world's largest problems, because at the end of the day, venture capital should be funding the next wave of global solutions for the rest of us, and we need more people playing in that space. What we don't do, or where we struggle, is that venture capital can be narrow in terms of who gets to play in that space for a lot of reasons that we've already discussed in this session, this event today, that I won't belabor. But what we try to do is make sure that every founder that we speak to leaves better than we met them. And so in a lot of ways, the conversation we're about to have are conversations that we tend to have one-on-one with these founders, whether or not they fit our profile. And I think this conversation is an important conversation, so that rather than like me just giving them one or two ideas of things that they should be looking at, later on down the line, there are more various types of capital that they can then tap into.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jessica Norwood. I am founder and CEO of Runway Roots and the Rooted Fund. It's one of the nation's first and largest reparative capital funds. And I want to make the distinction around reparative capital because it sounds just like what I'm saying. It really is meant to repair the relationship to communities and people who have been discriminated against and underinvested in, intentionally so. So we don't invest without understanding history and understanding the circumstances that got people into the place where they currently are. And I think folks talk about underrepresented founders. I'm talking specifically women, Black, brown. English may not be your first language, geographically different, all of the different kinds of things here. What makes the capital that we're talking about different is that the majority of those businesses are not venture companies. And so I think we over-index talking about venture capital when the majority of the businesses that we're talking about or that we want to see that make a really lovely and livable community are businesses that need debt, they need revenue share, royalty payments, they need all kinds of other kind of capital strategies. And so that's what we do. We do it from a reparative lens, meaning that we're not trying to take ownership of your companies. We're not trying to charge you. We never go over 4%. So this is not capital that you can get out anywhere else. We're really trying to repair the fact that you did not get the money earlier on. And that matters, I think, a lot when we think about people saying, oh, well, what's your collateralization, or what does your credit score look like, or what are all these things? Well, if you've never had access to the kind of capital, then you're not going to have performance in those particular indexes, so we don't measure against those kinds of things. I'm also the author of a book. You can actually get it down in the library. And the book is called Believe in You Money, What Would It Look Like If the Economy Loved Black People? Thank you. And so I put out Believe in You Money. I put out the earlier rounds of money that says, I think you should have a shot at trying. Just like everybody else who gets out there and they do these businesses and they get to fail forward, I'd like to see other Black, brown women get an opportunity to try a thing, make some mistakes, pivot, learn, and do it again. And the more that we create a world and an economy that can absorb that and appreciate that, I think we're going to get better businesses in the long run. What we don't solve for in our fund is the fact that more money is needed. And the reality is that we have a lot of folks who think it's much more sexier to talk about big exits, and which I think inherently has a level of a Hunger Games cannibalistic kind of strategy into it, when what we want is communities and people to be able to be rooted in place and to have real right relationship to their employees, and to not have to grow at some unrecognizable scale just to satisfy capital, to the capital providers and the institutions that support those things. So we need more reparative capital. We need to be talking about that as rigorously as we talk about venture capital, and we need to be talking about that specifically when we speak about these communities that have been underrepresented.
Hi, thank you. So I wear a couple of different hats. A lot of the work that I've done has been across many different funds and many different capital sources. And so I've worked with venture capitalists like Techstars and Antlers, these classic venture capital models, also with Village Capital that has a different orientation towards early stage investing and equity for impact-driven founders globally. I've also worked with philanthropists and blending these things together. And I have, I'll talk about a little bit of what I'm doing now and how that brought me to there. But I think that in terms of what I do differently and what I do in a lot of these portfolios is helping founders figure out what kinds of capital is right for them. So founders, nonprofit owners, even venture capitalists who are also raising money but wanting to do impact-related things. I work specifically tech for good, impact-related ventures, or underrepresented founders. So even if they want to go venture capital way, there's not always the firms that you all have, the capital's not available to them, even if their model fits. So working across the capital stack, I see a lot of folks who say, I want to get funded, and I like to hear the conversation. What I don't hear enough is like what kind of financing is right for you, because revenue can be a way to finance your business, but it doesn't always work if you're deep tech, biotech, and you need years to do that. So that's not the right kind of capital for them to go for revenue. Or if you're grants and you're not impact related, so what kinds of capital is right for you? I've worked with Village Capital, which we have Alyssa over here. I'm going to point to you to help create Capital Explorer, which helps. It's a free tool where founders can find which of up to 16 different ways to finance your business. So beyond grants or venture capital or debt, lots of different ways. So there's a lot of technical details that I really love geeking out on, but I kind of joke that I'm a financing doula of like, what are we trying to do here? What problem are we trying to solve? And then understanding the motivations and business models of everybody in the room, not because anybody is a bad person or one model's not. There are definitely effects from taking different kinds of capital. They incentivize different kinds of things, but using the right tool for the job, because I see a lot of great companies in the wrong capital structures. And then on the other side, how knowing what your goal is as someone trying to get external financing, what it's trying to do, being able to approach the right kind of financing for that. And what I see that the field doesn't have, that I struggle with, that I get frustrated with, is the education piece of what kind of financing right for you, because we talk a lot about this venture capital. It's an incredible, like, look at these outside outcomes. Those are, the unicorns are fantasy. Do they not? There's such an outlier versus the backbone of the economy being SMEs, or most businesses, most venture-backed businesses exiting at 75 million versus unicorn companies. So it's the narrative, it's the education about what kind of financing is right for you, and then who is supplying what? Where is the where's the database of if my model looks like this, these are the options for me, and who's supplying it?
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to pivot our second question a little bit. We had this little prep call, and now I'm going to go ahead and ruin everything that we planned. Not really. I want to come to this second question that we talked about, which is we're in this conversation talking about alternative capital, and each of you has already touched on this in your introduction, so thank you for that. I'm wondering, so I want to hear from each of us what our definition is of alternative, or alternative to what. So in other words, what is traditional? But I'm wondering if each of you could do that by way of offering an example, like a real life example of someone you've worked with or something that you've done that can help to contextualize what we understand or what you each understand to be alternative, and alternative to what. I know I just threw that right in there. We did not prep this, and I'm hoping that we can give it a go. I'm just trying to root it into some real life example experience. You want to kick us off, Laurie?
Yeah, so having a lot of experience across funds and different kinds of capital and being a real geek about it, what I have, one of the hats I wear is as a visiting partner at a venture fund here in Texas. It's 2 female GPs. They invest in female founders, building at the intersection of health and the environment. They've been very thoughtful about the construction of their portfolio for the first 2 funds and how they build those funds. Now we're looking at what happens next, because if you're in venture capital, you may notice that there's a lot of money locked up. People aren't IPOing, there's not exits, and so we're looking. Yes.
Probably everyone knows, but what's an IPO?
Okay, great. So
probably everyone knows.
Okay, so the fundamentals of investing, right? I put money in a company, but I got to get the money out at a multiple because I got the money from those people that I made an agreement with, and I got to take the money back to them. That's my job as an investor, is to make money on the money. Now, it works if we're all aligned, And sometimes I talk about venture capital as think about it if you owed someone money, like a debt, and you had no payment for a long time, but then you had a giant balloon payment at the end, who's paying that? And then you're either selling to another company, a private sale, an acquisition, or you're selling to the public. That's an initial public offering. So your company shares that were financed by these guys are now being bought by anyone who participates in the stock market. So we get the money in. How does the money come out? How does the money come out? At what multiple? On what timeline? And is there any impact fidelity if that's important to you? Is that a line for that? Because if I take venture capital, it would be very easy to look down and say, venture capital generally as a tool its goal is to maximize profit. No problem. That's what it does. A tiger is a tiger. Maximize profit to the shareholders. That's what we signed up for. So if I have someone in my company that is hired to measure impact, I'm paying for their salary. Is that maximizing the profit? Is that what I'm supposed to do? If I don't pay for their salary, if I don't check my supply chain, another way to say that is, if my job is to strip mine a mountain to get the coal out, I'm not paid to clean the mountain up. And I pass that on to the people in the community, the government, et cetera, right? It's a great, very profitable business if I don't have to do any of that. If I have to add that in, profitability looks different. So I think the things that I care about, and I would imagine a lot of us care about, is how do we build businesses that benefit people and consider those things in the way we build our businesses? And then how do we align the money and the financing to do those things? Because no problem with venture capital as an instrument, but there are things that we are incentivized for and line up with in that model. So bringing it to an example of what I'm looking at now, so those sales aren't happening. How do we get the money out? So the people I got money from and said, I'm going to bring it back to you in this timeline are like, yo, where's my money? Because that's fair that we signed a contract. And so what does it look like going forward? So my work with this fund is actually, it's called liquidity, and the money has to get liquid. And so I'm looking at a model where we are doing redeemable equity. As a founder, I am going to sell you my shares for the investment you're putting in, but I know I can buy it back. I can redeem that equity and get my shares back at a multiple, that you're taking a risk on me now, and I'm gonna pay for that, but I can't go to a bank. I don't have the underwriting history. So we're looking at a model that will return that money faster because I'm exiting the financing likely through my customers, through my revenue. How am I exiting the financing product? And so that's just one way that we're like saying, okay, we have this 10-year timeline where things are locked up. Can we return the money faster in a way that aligns that for the company? Now, again, it's a narrow aperture we're looking for of companies that are, I can't invest in biotech that's going to take 7 years to get to revenue because I can't pay it back in that time because I'm making promises to these folks. So the point is I'm looking at math and I'm looking at timeline and I'm looking at what's in my aperture and I'm looking at some tools that are in the toolbox to do that differently.
Yeah, so look, I think let's go back to the question. What are traditional forms of capital, right? And I think they really fall into two buckets in the way I think about the world. There's your profit of your company, and actually you reinvesting that into the business itself. That should be the first place everybody starts. And then the next place is lending, right? And that has historically been banks that have played that or the government, right? You can go to the Small Business Administration and get a loan to help start your business. And those are the two places you should start. Venture should probably be the last place you get to because we are very, very expensive. We are going to take ownership in your business and we're going to sit there for a long time until you have a liquidity event, and we're going to force that. We're going to force you to have to sell your company at some point because it's the only way in the traditional venture model we get paid. And we have a fiduciary responsibility to the people who give us money to do that. And so you have to understand who you're getting into bed with when you work with a venture capitalist. You have to understand the nature of the capital you're taking on fundamentally, and it's not all the same. They all come with their own strings. And so really unpacking what are the incentive models that's driving their desire to come to you. Venture, I would argue, is actually one of those very alternative forms of capital. We represent a very small part of the market, and ultimately the sort of modern iteration of venture was really just built because of two things. Building tech companies required a lot of money and investment to actually build out the people and the workforce and the assets you often needed from an infrastructure. So think about like the actual hardware and computers to actually build those businesses. You needed that up front. And so venture was a phenomenal tool to get you that. And then the other piece of it is they were highly competitive environments. And so if you got a competitor that's well-funded, you often need to go after venture so you can similarly compete, whether that's with the people growth or the ad budgets that is going after to help drive that product exposure out to the broader ecosystem. But fundamentally, like, we should be considered one of the last forms of capital because there's a lot of other things that exist out there. And the one that I think doesn't get enough engagement often is non-dilutive forms, right? Looking at grants, looking at institutions that are trying to enable an organization or a company to be successful. And there's a lot of non-dilutive grants that exist out there, whether those non-dilutive, meaning they aren't going to take equity from you as part of their capital transaction to you. So we're not going to dilute you, which is essentially taking part of your equity away and owning it ourselves.
Okay. So I think Frederik just covered this well, right? Like, across finance, venture capital is considered an alternative form of investment. I think this room wants to figure out what is an alternative to venture capital for people building businesses. And Frederik laid out a great, I don't want to repeat things that he said and things that you've started to cover. I'll tell you, one of the things I see is a lack of education and awareness around like what those other sources are and an understanding of like what they should tap into, right? Like, so in wearing another hat, I don't know if my Camelback Ventures friends are here, but I coach nonprofit founders that don't know what programmatic related investments are, right? And so thinking about like the day that you set up to run and launch a business, you don't immediately become an expert on like, one, financing, number two, like the leanest and most efficient ways to build your business to reduce the amount of outside capital that you need. And so if I were giving an example to get to your point, right? Somebody came to me, a good friend, he said, hey, I need to raise $1 million to launch this wine brand. I said, why do you need $1 million? Show me. He's like, well, that's what people raise. all right, let's unpack that. Let's break that down. And so like, yeah, he's not going to build a model. Like I live in Excel models. We built a model. We built it. We broke it down. He only needed $100,000 to get to the next phase, right? I think that can be considered an alternative approach within this space because most venture capital investors give you a yes or a no without the feedback as to why you're a fit. And at a minimum, what I think people like Frederick and I can do is unpack and decode what that venture capital no means so that it's a learning point and a launch point for you to for these founders to continue discovering what the right fit is for them.
I don't actually remember the question, but I'm just going to go wherever I want to go. Great. You know, one of the things that I'm sitting here thinking about is the fact that for as long as I can remember, so I started my fund 10 years ago. We've been at different iterations and closed different funds. I also borrow capital from investors and have to pay them back. One of the differences is that I'm also very much educating those investors about what terms are acceptable for the community they say they want to support. So I don't let them tell me, I tell them that this is, for the outcome that you're trying to get, like if you care about equity, you want justice, you want to see founders of different ilk coming in, then the capital needs to perform this particular way. So there's a lot of education. I think that's an alternative that we do a lot. You know, what I have always heard, and I don't know if everybody here has also heard this, but it doesn't matter what conversation I'm in or what room or what's, you know, whatever, people will always say access to capital is a challenge. And the reason I want to say this to you in this way is that for as much as we hear about venture capital, this is no diss to my friends here, it doesn't solve the need for capital. So we keep saying we need more access to capital, and then what we get presented is here's more of this venture, here's more of this, here's more of this, and it doesn't actually solve the pain point. So what the alternative would be is something that actually solves the pain point. And what we get more of is capital that is responsive to the capital provider. So the folks who have the money are driving that conversation, not the people who need the money or the businesses, not the community that actually needs a really solid product. They're not driving it. It is the investor who is giving the fund manager, the GP, that money that is now driving the expectations. We're not going to get to a level of equity doing it that way. That's just it, bottom line. It doesn't mean that there is not some place, but I'm saying, and I said this in the last go round, we have over-indexed, meaning we have too many people who are saying venture, 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 and you know, I get it. I get why we're saying is we're saying, all right, well, when it comes to underrepresented founders, women, black, brown, so forth, that they are getting, you know, less than 3%, less than 1%, depends on which segment I'm breaking down. But I would say that's the design of it. The design is actually to carve out and to advance people who look and sound a particular way. So why would I keep replicating a model that already does not see me and does not value me and then present it to people when they're saying, we need more access to capital, present the actual model to them that is meant to exclude them. So I would argue that, you know, alternative in this moment is really breaking that whole system down. If you're not saying that, I don't know if it's really alternative. I think it is just rage bait at that point.
All right, Jessica, thank you. As always, thank you. I want to get into, so I think what we're starting, whoopsie daisy, I think what we're starting to touch into here is the question of power. The question of power inside of what we're talking about. And this is where I'm going to invite y'all to start to think about jumping into the conversation. So we were talking about this question of what does it mean to vet? what does it mean to vet as an investor? What does it mean to vet the businesses that you may invest in? But also, and equally, perhaps more importantly, what does it mean as someone seeking capital for your business to vet the capital that you are seeking? Like to figure out if it's the right fit, to figure out if there's alignment, to figure out if they're the right people. And I think in that conversation is actually fundamentally a conversation about power. And so I'm going to get out of this seat and then we can start to, come in and out. But I'm going to throw it to y'all first and then folks will start to find their way in. And I might come back to you first, Jessica, and then we'll go around or pass it around however you want. But I want to hear a little bit about this question of how do we think about vetting? And I think there's a relationship here also to this education piece that we've also started to touch on, which is, do people know the right kinds of questions to be asking, or is all they know venture or philanthropy? You know what I mean? So how do we be empowered when we are seeking capital? And also, what are the perhaps alternative ways that the funds that you're working around using to vet the kinds of people that you are investing in? And now I'm going to open this seat, and this is where any of y'all can come in and take the seat, and then you're going to go in and out, and it's going to be great. All right, here we go.
All right, so I like the point about power because I think that's ultimately what it is we're talking about, Jocelyn. And, I would say that first, let me back up and just say a couple things about reparative capital and just give you a quick definition. It works at 3 different levels. The first level of reparative capital is going to be about centering the people who have been historically harmed, not centering the capital. So people will say, "Oh, I can't afford to lose. We can't afford to lose this." Where reparative capital is going to say, "We can't afford to not make that investment." Right? That's the difference. So centering the people, not the capital or the capital provider or the process. You might hear people say, "But that's not how things are done." We're not going to center the process. We're going to center the people. Secondly, it's going to require that the people who are investing on all sides of the coin of this, from the borrower or the person who's receiving the investment, the capital providers, the intermediary or fund managers, everybody there has to be doing their work to undo racism, bias, all these kinds of things, shame, blame. That's a lot of the reasons why we don't have, sometimes we don't know how to show up in these conversations because we're carrying a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, and a lot of blame, and not having a lot of experience in how to talk about money in a public way because we haven't been presented opportunities to do so. So that's number 2. Number 3 is that you make reparative action. So it's not enough to just say, "Oh, woo, 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 I care about what happened." We need to see that demonstrated in the way that you're moving your money. People will tell you, "Show me your budget or your balance sheet and I'll show you what you care about." If you tell me you care about these things, then I need to see the investment. Here's the thing. We often have in this current capitalistic economy world, where we will be very comfortable with going over and making the money over here and doing whatever it takes to make that money, and then say philanthropically, "I'm going to try to solve the problems that this other thing created." I don't believe that works. If it did work, we'd have a different outcome. What I believe really works is you invest in the world you want to see created today. So if you want a world that's more equitable, then your investment, how you talk about it, how you empower the people who are receiving the capital, all of that has to be in alignment. That is reparative capital, and that is how you disrupt power in this situation. All right.
Jocelyn, you asked a very simple question, right? How do we underwrite and make decisions? At a very basic level, there's another form of capital that we're not talking about, which is relationship capital. So much of what we all do, so much of the finance world is ultimately predicated on networks and me believing I understand you, I understand your story, I can connect to it, and because of that, because I know who you are, I'm willing to take a bet on you. And the problem is we don't have equal access to those dollars. The communities have been put in positions to allocate those dollars. And the reality is that when we unpack like this broader question, and this is something that Jessica was kind of alluding to, like who gives the capital out? Who are the capital allocators, and where does those sources come from? Well, they're backing the ecosystems that they know best, right? You look at the endowments of major universities. You look at public pension funds and these small networks that they're connected to and how they're networking and engaging with general partners or VCs or fund managers, right? There are very unique ecosystems that people have to buy or get invited into, rooms that you need to have access to that you're not just going to walk off the street and get access to. And so developing and building that relationship capital matters. And that's how you learn how to navigate the different forms, understand what are people looking for. You take two VCs, you take Kwamena, and you ask us, what are we looking for? We're not going to underwrite and look at the exact same companies because we have different thematic things we like. We have different types of founders we want to back. Ultimately, we have different networks. And those networks are what we're going to use to underwrite and evaluate whether we can trust you. Because we have to make a decision in a constrained amount of time. And we're going to lean into those ecosystems that we trust already.
Some of the ways that I like to empower founders I work with and also investors who are starting their funds is kind of like what you were saying is, what do you need the money for? And I like to invite folks who are wanting to raise money for their companies to consider like they are their number one investor and how do they get their money out of their company. First question I ask every founder I meet with is, if I fast forward 10 years and everything you want has come true, what does it look like? And one founder, true story, said, I'm ringing the bell at NASDAQ, and if I get acquired, that's a failure. And I said, go get some venture capital, because he's not going to do it another way. That dog is going to do that. And then another one said, my dental innovation is going to be beside everyone's toothbrush and every sink across the world so that kids are never afraid to go to the dentist, and all of the underlying health problems that come from not taking care of your teeth are solved. I'm like, that's a different thing that's motivating this founder. And what that looks like, they can still have a giant business. The capital provider that's going to care about those things and be aligned with them is different. So inviting them to think about the power that they have to build their business, because I have a thesis that they're not going to be successful if they try and contort themselves into something else. And so and I've tried to do it. When I was a founder, I was too mission-driven for venture capital and too commercial for philanthropy. And it was a different time. And so I've lived this as well and tried to be this to that person and that to that person. And it did not work, let me tell you that. So just that's where I try and give back power to the founder of like, what are we trying to solve here? You were talking about design. Financing products are like tech products. What are we designing? Who's going to use it? What is their experience? And those are the kind of power conversations I like to have to empower those founders. And I think another thing you said too is that I don't expect founders to be experts in finance. I want them to be experts in providing value to their customers or users. That's what I want to invest in. That's how I'm not going to get blindsided. I'm the expert in the financing, and I love it. That's like, I have the founder market fit for that, and I want to help them through that process or visit with someone who's an expert in the kind of product that they're looking for and make those referrals to open up that relational capital to say, I can't invest in you because of my thesis or how I took this or my math equation, but I know someone who can help you. I like to help people on their way. So how do I make it easy for people to receive that email and to send that email and help people on their way?
I'm the last one, then we get to go at it. I want to lean into listening for understanding and lean into the energy that Jessica was bringing. Because the conversation is overweight venture. So I'm going to speak to how to vet your investors in the most generalist sense possible so it is more applicable to different types of capital. But I'm also going to propose that there is a mismatch at the LP limited partner at the top of the food chain level. And what I think we need is more alignment with investors that define their ROI, their return on investment, with what it is we want to solve. the more we can solve the top of that food chain level, the more capital will be available for these different things. And I tend to not refer to myself as a venture capitalist, despite the fact that I do venture capital very well. I'm just a human that works in this space. And what I'm trying to do is be a part of those conversations that start chipping into that iceberg to create more funds that will fund reparative and restorative strategies and funds, because that's the return on investment they're looking for, and now we're aligned. Return on investment doesn't just have to be cash. In terms of vetting, one thing I see a lot when I speak to founders is that they don't understand the theses of the investors that they are reaching out to. So they will often reach out to anybody and everybody with capital, and they will get a bunch of no's, and every no hurts. So one thing I tell founders is every no is not the same no. If they are in your space and doing the types of things that you do and have invested in somebody like you before, that no is the most valuable because there's real insight into it. A lot of other no's are just back solving for some of the things we talked about earlier, is that like venture fits a small window. So I would lean into that, like really understanding thesis, strategy, and prior investment to figure out how to vet the type of capital that you're looking at.
I think I'm the first outsider to speak, so.
Insider, you're a
Oh yeah, I'm an insider. So Rich Palmer, I run Adaptation Ventures along with my co-GP. We invest in disability and neurodivergent tech companies. Can you hear me? Yep. Disability. Okay, you got to own the mic, right? Yeah, there we go. That's a little better. Rich Palmer, we invest in disability and neurodivergent tech companies. And when you're talking about like getting the power from the LPs and what power means, is power capital or is it something else? And so one of the things that we found is when a founder who's serving the disability community or the neurodivergent community is pitching someone who has never seen somebody or had that experience, blank stares, you're never getting a check, right? So what we ended up doing was putting together our LPs, rich people. You need some capital, but folks who are blind, who have spinal cord injuries, who are paralyzed, who are deaf. I think we're maybe the only ones who kind of gave them that access to venture. But there's two reasons that happen, which are kind of interesting. One, if you want to be an LP in a venture fund, it's usually hundreds of thousands of dollars is the ticket size, right? How do we create models that lower that cost? Because if you look, I used to be on the board of the Angel Capital Association. 1 in 5 US households are accredited. That means 1 in 5 can invest in your company without a lot of loopholes. And in some venture capital funds, about 20% of your LPs can be non-accredited too. So there's ways to do it, we just haven't knocked on the door. And so what, again, was really interesting is in talking to people, we lowered our minimums to $36K. Over 3 years, that's $12,000 to get involved in venture. All of a sudden you're like, oh, that's a vacation, or I help a blind founder. That's a vacation, or I solve a neurodivergent problem. And so one thing that's really interesting too is where does that capital come from? Is that coming when you just come over the $1 million mark because your stock portfolio has gone up, but you're afraid to take that money out of the market, right? Because that's what people are afraid. It's like crazy right now. So there's this whole other pool of capital called donor advised funds. Anybody know this? And it's money that has already been donated to a cause or to a pool. We don't know what that is just yet. I get the tax write-off and it's sitting there. And it's like $300 or $400 billion right now. It's just sitting there, waiting to be deployed. And so a lot of what we've done is, when you're talking to your LPs, if anybody's raising a fund, getting that DAF money into your fund is totally possible. It can't go back into your wallet, but it goes into the founder's hands to create all the value back into donor advised fund, talking about reparative, recycling money and all that kind of stuff. And what's really cool, and this, probably shouldn't say this because come to me, I'm a VC. Individual angels can actually invest through their DAF directly into your company as well. And it's really cool because before they're like, charity, I don't know if I should invest in a charity. Where does all that money go? Is it actually going to people that I'm trying to help, or is it going into people's salaries? Now it goes into a venture scale company. So just remember, if the LPs, capital is not the only thing of value. If they represent your market, it's incredible. You should see some of the stuff we're doing. And there's other ways to get that money, because Fidelity has no incentive to let that money go anywhere. You got to push. So thank you all for the time.
Hi, my name is Naima McQueen. I work with Runway Roots. If you were here with me in the Fishbowl yesterday, you know I like to talk about shared language and communication. And so one of the things I wanted to come back to, especially with the friend who was right over here discussing DAFs and how to access the funding, is to invite us to also think about the responsibility of who it is to find whom. If you are already harboring resources, you have power to make a decision. Power allows you to individually have that autonomy for self-determination, right? And so if we're talking about power sharing, we have to figure out how to extend that to other people. One of the things I love about Runway is that we are growing with our funders as well. So it's not only about educating the entrepreneur about the kind of capital that they need, but also the funders and investors we work with, how to be the kind of funders and investors they say they want to be and they say they are. Because there are a lot of folks that say they are a thing, but aren't necessarily aligned with the practice, right? And so we want to make sure that we're helping folks engage in that way so that we are not returning to systems that are traditional, that we're actually doing the thing we said we're doing. So when we're vetting partners, we're making sure like, hey, what are the ways in which you're demonstrating that, to Jessica's point? How does that look? How are you sharing that power? I think on the other side of that, for our entrepreneurs, we're also ensuring that their goals are not simply individual. And I think there's been a lot about like, what is the goal of the entrepreneur, which is great. But what is your goal for the community you're hoping to impact? Because if we're talking about an alternative capital, right? We're talking about capital for folks who would not be considered mainstream. Most of those folks are looking to do things for their community, simply, not trying to grow, trying to scale a million times. They just want to make sure their community is set, right? And so what are the ways in which we sustain their work? And when we're looking at those entrepreneurs, it's yes, how are you navigating your money trauma? How can we be in community to support you through that? And what is your intention for your business to impact the folks around you? That's a big part of how we vet our businesses. If we're not looking at the credit score, because if we think about it, we think about the concept of personal credit. A lot of that fell off when we decided the credit score was the thing. The credit score is barely older than I am, right? And so if that is barely 45 years old, why can't we disrupt it? It is not actually the thing that makes a difference. A lot of these systems have barely been around for 50 years. And so when we talk about alternative, it is what are the ways in which your solution is not following in line with the very thing that got us here to begin with. And so I think looking at community investment as part of your goals and what it is you want to do is the root and the groundedness of what it is to be alternative in this very individualistic society right now.
Thank you. My name is Alyssa Padron. I'm with Village Capital. Specifically, I lead the Resource Initiative, and this is an initiative that we set up to support what we call ESOs, Entrepreneur Support Organizations. So there's a couple threads that I'm going to pull on here in terms of relational capital and kind of power sharing with investors. It's important what you know first and foremost about Village Capital is that we pioneer the peer investment selection system. So we, for the last 15 years, have been teaching entrepreneurs how to think like investors. And throughout our accelerator program, yes, we're teaching them how to speak investors so that they can be successful in the venture capital model. But more than anything, we want to teach them how to think like an investor and understand that it is actually not that hard to take a look. We have built a system across 9 different categories, a couple different levels. They too can understand what an investor is looking for and what makes investability within a startup. Now, where we are currently, we've been doing the same thing for about 15 years, and that's a long time to be doing any one thing, especially as an organization that wants to continue to be on the leading edge of innovative finance and the ways that we are supporting the startup ecosystem. So we're changing a lot about what we're doing right now. Some of what we're putting together for our accelerator programming is what we're calling purpose-suited capital. We have completely shifted the way that we are talking about growth for startups and helping them see how they can create their business with impact first in mind. We want to help them grow their impact first and foremost, and then build a capital stack that supports the way that that's going to grow. And that's not going to be VC, it's not going to be hockey stick growth for everyone. And where our ESOs come in, we've built a network of really great nonprofit partners, accelerators, incubators, co-working spaces, you name it. And their vetting comes into our process when we think about who are the people who are on the ground in these local communities who have really seen these founders grow over the last several years. And I think about the ecosystem I grew up in here in Austin, and the fact I met Laurie in 2018. I've worked at 4 different accelerators here in Austin, now national and Village Capital. And it's really important to stay connected to those communities, and really important for me to stay connected to the founders that I have seen grow and change and develop over those years. So some of the ways that we're trying to kind of integrate them into the investment process is thinking a little bit more about, lots of ESOs have come to me and they're like, we need to get capital in the hands of founders, so we're gonna start a fund. And I'm like, oh no, it's so hard. It's and I don't want to discourage them and say that you can't. It is just actually the most difficult way to try to get capital in the hands of founders. So over the summer, we ran a capital access program for ESOs that said, hey, did you know there's actually these huge spectrum of capital for founders, and actually probably a lot of other options that are going to be a really great fit to support the founders that you're already supporting through your programming, through your capacity support, through whatever their programming or their offerings are for their local ecosystems. So just pulling on a couple different threads there to bring together some of the solutions and the things that we're thinking about within Village Capital, but also just highlighting that it's kind of a big and new and scary time in our organization. We're shifting a lot about what we're doing and a lot about how we're thinking and talking about things. And I think that's one of the most important things to be open about and be able to kind of sit with that discomfort within an organization and within what your plan might look like for the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Thank you, Alyssa. I'm sitting with this question of power and trying to understand how we go about funding and supporting funds like Village Capital, like Jessica's fund, that are focused on reparative capital. And one of the things I want to try to deconstruct and ask about is, when you mention public pension funds, for the brother who's one of the co-founders of BLCK VC, who's in the public pension funds, right? Because I want to highlight this, now I lead a tech company, but this is my second career. My first career was as a finance lawyer on Wall Street, and we helped to do a lot of fund formations. And one of the largest LP, or some of the largest category of LPs, are limited partners who invest in these funds, are public pension funds. But that is our teachers' retirement funds, our fire department retirement funds, our police retirement, and those are levers that I believe we have when I think about who's in this room as people who help to shape policy and people who help to create companies and funds, et cetera. And I don't want us to overlook that lever, because it's a really important and accessible lever. And those are also retirement funds that are aligned with what we're talking about when we talk about the double bottom line and impacting our communities. So I just wanted to highlight, I don't know if there are other funding sources other than foundations and retirement funds that could be a potential lever, but I just wanted to take a moment to highlight that.
I'm going to jump in with just a facilitative moment, totally fine. We've got about 15-ish minutes left. So if one person wanted to come and join the last seat, that'll be it, and we'll have the conversation from those who are with us here, and then I will wrap us up and send us into the night with love and adoration. Go ahead.
Thank you. Oh, hi everyone. I'm Doug Rand. I've been a venture-backed entrepreneur, for better or for worse, and I've also been a small business founder who was derisively called, a lifestyle business owner. And I just have a question for this group. Nobody has to answer it now, but come find me, and, we can talk more. But I am so curious about how to solve the following problem that I think we all have seen, which there's hundreds of thousands, probably millions of people in America of all backgrounds who could be incredible business founders. But it's not a crime to want to start a business that's merely going to be profitable and not IPO or get acquired, right? But you wouldn't know that from reading our media. You wouldn't know that from, South by Southwest and other, congregations of people. The problem is it doesn't pencil out, or at least not thought to, right? Like most new companies, from a tiny bodega to a, would-be manufacturing company, are going to fail within the first 5 years. And I don't know that that's probably just baked into reality. That's truth number one. Truth number two is you can't actually go to the Small Business Administration for a loan if you're just starting, if you just got a slide deck. And you can't even go to a bank that has massive subsidies from the Small Business Administration because they're going to want collateral. Or if you're an immigrant, well, yeah, I mean, there's barriers upon barriers upon barriers. So how does any company that you've ever heard of that wasn't venture-backed get started? It got started because there was friends and family. It got started because someone put out a second mortgage on their house because they owned a house. They got started because someone put debt on their credit card because they had a credit card. So you can easily see how that is not accessible to most people. And what we're telling even those privileged few who have those resources is, congratulations, you are now likely to go bankrupt in the next 5 years, right? So maybe I just need to go to the Village Capital, tool, and it'll answer all my questions. But I'm so curious about what models people have found that would allow institutional capital to diversify risk across a whole bunch of non-venture-backable companies, so that normal entrepreneurs who, again, start more than 99% of the companies in America every year, are not either frozen out or likely to go bankrupt personally, because that's not something that venture-backed founders have to worry about.
Hi, so my name is Melanie Smith. I work for Hack Club Bank, and I don't have an answer for your question, but along a similar vein, it is just as difficult to start a nonprofit. If you are in a community and you are trying to do good and you have an idea and it is charitable in nature and you think, hey, I'm gonna get people to donate to me and I'm gonna raise this money for this amazing initiative and then give back to my community, the very first thing you're told is you've got a lot of operational work you're going to have to do, and you should probably already have $500,000 or at least, a good chunk of money to get that started. So at Hack Club Bank, one of the things that's alternative that we've started and we've been doing for a little while is fiscal sponsorship. So we fiscally sponsor groups that have a charitable mission that do not have a lot of capital or do not have access to a lot of funding from foundations. Maybe it's because they don't know the right person. Maybe it's because they just haven't been in the right spaces. Or maybe it's just because they just got started. But most traditional fiscal sponsors require you to have a large amount of money already ready to go before you can even start. And at Hack Club Bank, one of the things that we do is we partner with people who have a great idea, who want to get it off the ground, and who maybe are just starting out. And we started because one community that does not usually have access to a lot of power are teenagers. They usually are locked out of just about every world, including the financial one. And we started working with them and flipped the power dynamic, giving them access to nonprofit dollars. And we've expanded that kind of throughout many different communities. But yeah, it's how do we get some of these smaller nonprofits who are just kind of getting started to access some of these foundations, some of these fundings? Because these nonprofit founders have just as amazing of ideas as others. They may just don't have the networking and the community to back that.
I love that. And I guess, am I the last speaker? Oh, lovely.
I'm going to jump in.
You're going to jump in. Doug began to name something that I want to riff on, and as did the just prior speaker, and that is, and I'm going to get there by reframing the question a little bit, which is, what is the capital we need for the tech we want? And the short answer is we want all the flavors of capital. I sometimes call venture capital vanilla capital because historically it's been very white. But it's also very standardized. Like every venture capital firm and every fund functions in exactly the same way, which is great because it means you can clone them and take them to different demographics, different sectors, different geographies, and it's fundamentally the same internal business model, just like grant funding is fundamentally the same internal economic model as is debt, right? So you have, if this was an ice cream store, it would be a very boring ice cream store. You have vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. I come from Portland, Oregon, where we do things like balsamic vinegar, Oreo crumble. So we need more flavors of capital in this space. And the challenge is that some of the obvious contenders, like grant funding, are just as inaccessible as venture. Something like 90% of all foundations do not accept unsolicited proposals. Trying to get into these networks, Steph Grivney, who was here earlier, who won't mind me mentioning this, I think, is off to have dinner with a billionaire because she knows a billionaire. How many people here are 1 degree or even 2 degrees of separation from a billionaire? Not, oh, but there's one hand. Awesome, so 1 in 50. And then you think, oh, well, PRIs, maybe there's a program-related investment for me. Last time I tried to raise a PRI for a tech company that I co-founded, that investment officer said, come to us when you have $1 million in ARR, which, if you haven't guessed, is exactly what a VC would tell you, which tells you everything you need to know about the readiness of the foundation space to actually invest in the tech we want if they model their investment theses on venture capital. And it goes down the list. Then you've got some intrepid new emerging fund managers. My favorite example in this space is the Kaufman Foundation. They've done a lot of work encouraging inclusive entrepreneurship. They've done some catalytic capital instruments. Lovely. Talk to their chief investment officer. She will tell you that the smallest check she can write is 1% of their endowment. That's a $2.5 million check. But wait, that's not the only constraint she operates under. She cannot be more than 10% in any one fund. Yeah, you do the math, right? It was $25 million, the smallest check. She can't be more than 10%. The smallest fund she can be in is $250 million. How big was your fund? Oh, I'm sorry, doesn't qualify, right? Too bad, so sad. How long does it take the average new fund manager to get to a 9-figure fund? My friend Bettina, who's running EFM, is on her 3rd fund in ecological forestry. 15 years. Do we have 15 years to build the tech we want in here? So there are some really interesting design and structural challenges that I would love for us to address when we think about not just alternative capital, but really capital orchestration along the whole capital spectrum and into the different flavors of capital that are needed. And because I know our friends at Omidyar are recording these sessions, want to speak some ideas into the room. One is that orchestration need is real. What also is real is you get great founders who get venture funding, but is it really the best for the tech we want that their company's IPO, only 20% of venture funded companies IPO, only a third of those are around 10 years later? Is that what we want for our tech we want companies? What if I want them to persist in perpetuity? I foolishly took some VC early on. What we need is a buyout fund. Like, we need to help. I've been talking to a great tech founder. She raised $20 million in VC for her company. Her VC investors who are sitting on her board are now breathing down her neck to let herself be acquired. There is an organization, a PE fund called Bending Spoons. They just bought Eventbrite. You know what they do? They fire everyone in the company and then refactor the stack to put it all under one set. If you care about the people you have built your tech we want venture with, this is unacceptable. But that's the kind of so a buyout fund for those types of people, and frankly a roll-up fund, because there's a lot of sort of early stage companies that we could probably reconfigure and refactor in interesting ways if we did it with like a benign lens, like if it was Bending Spoons but nice, There's actually a great deal of existing talent in the sort of the tech we want space that is sort of dying on the vine potentially, because no funder can find the aligned investors quickly enough. That many-to-many matchmaking is really, really hard to do. So more questions than answers.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I am not a fund manager or custodian or anything like that. I've had a couple failed businesses. I recently had a successful business. I'm going to get back in the game. And what strikes me as somebody who's just looking at the field right now, this is basically what it looks like when you have a successful model that's then able to raise like 6 more bigger versions of itself. And it's what it looks like when you have consolidation in the banking industry and you have PE and VC, and we raised 100 million and now it's 10 billion and now we have minimums on where we can go. And it's ultimately based off of, and I forget who said it, so apologize. It's based off of what the investors in the funds are dictating they want, which is ultimately return on capital. I have a feeling not much is going to change until we societally view money not as a scarce element, which is hard to do because literally every single thing in our society tells us that money is scarce, and if you better have enough, because if you don't have enough and somebody else will. So yeah, I think that's kind of like the big fundamental shift in behavior and philosophy that's needed, because once you do that, then you can freely fund innovation that's good for people, that's based primarily and principled in the furthering and evolution of society. And you don't really get that if you're like, well, technically also we got to get a return for our shareholders. If you can actually, number one, say we're here for the impact, and then number two, say we're here for the money, I think probably in 10 to 15 years we will realize that that's the formula that always has won. And therefore, if you just build from that, which requires a little bit more trust in the meantime, you'll probably get there faster than others. But I just think this is like when the tentacles of capitalism, and look, I think capitalism is a great system compared to lots of other additional ones. When the tentacles go further and further out, they have to like scratch deeper and deeper, and you have to give up on essentially choice, because you're like, there's less to do, there's less areas to go, and therefore we have to just make it come back to the dollar. And I think that creates a lot of challenges.
Let's have a couple like lightning round reflections. Maybe we'll start with you, Laurie. We'll finish with you, Jessica, and then we'll wrap it up.
I wanted to make a couple comments about vetting and first money in. I've worked across the capital stack and like met impact investors, and I asked them like, what's your multiple you're looking for? And they're like, oh, market rate returns, and we don't actually require impact measurement. And I'm like, okay, understood. And I think that like for founders who are trying to raise, for anybody who's trying to raise money from someone, like maybe this is very ungenerous, but I'm like, I like to think about what's going to get someone promoted or fired, or are they just trying to say the same? And because we all owe someone something, maybe, or we're trying to create something for someone. Like, what's my success criteria of the person I'm asking for things from? And when I understand that the investors in that impact investors funds don't care about impact, they're not measuring impact, like you're saying, the budget tells you everything. And so then I can understand, are we aligned or not? So when I'm looking at, are these people aligned with me? What's going to get them ahead or not? And then we're clear. I don't mind what you're up to. I just want to be clear about it, because then I know. So that's a thing. And on that point, I get very frustrated with this, like, first money in. You know, Kendra Scott is a huge brand here in Texas and Austin, female billionaire. And I'm not going to negate any of the work that company's done, but I get really protective when I hear her talk about I was a single mom making earrings on my bed, and then I built this company, without talking about how she then remarried and her husband invested in the company. No problem with that, but I get protective of women who are single moms making errands on their bed, blaming themselves for not becoming billionaires. So where does the first money come in from? And what I have seen time and time again is that our community is the first money in. Whether it's lending circles from an organization that was here yesterday, that's here in Texas, that has done community giving circles and lending, now 50 million, work you're doing. Like, I just don't think, I haven't had a lot of success trying to get the dinners with the billionaires and waiting for that versus like, who in my community can I do this? Can I provide service for a customer and the value is exchanged? And I think that like a real alternative question is like, what is enough?
Yes.
What is enough? Like, do we have to have these outside returns? Should pension funds be investing in venture capital? That's a bigger question, right? But like, what is enough? And like, what's enough in our community? What are we trying to build? How are we supporting our community? And I think like bringing it back to what I am like so buoyed and excited about this community is that we're not talking about the tech we want as an alternative necessarily. It's like important work being done to fight big tech and the tech bros and all that. But like, if we didn't have that, what would we want? What is the capital that we want? I want to go in this ice cream shop. I want to like get funded from my community that knows me. And I also have opportunities to like scale something because my dental innovation is going to change things for the world, right? So I like have my pragmatist and sometimes my pessimist over here, and then like I'm in this work because what we want and then where we go. And I get really excited to be in spaces like this because like being in reality of these people aren't going to fund me. If I'm not in their portfolio, I'm probably not going to be the first one. Move on. Is how I feel. And then what am I going to create? My friends and colleagues who push me and challenge me, and also like we carry as we climb.
I love that. Thank you. I'm protective of the single mom making the earrings on her bed too. And one thing I want, if you're making earrings or any businesses, creative or otherwise, there's a part here that I want to say that I don't think people get. There's just not enough naming a thing. And so I'm going to name it for you right now. If you are an underrepresented founder, however you slice that pie, because it's geographic, because gender, because all of the things, you might get, I think we talked about early rounds of money, your friends and family money, or believe in you money, or you're going to get a pre-seed, seed, Series A. Here's the thing. When you start to go and everybody jumps automatically to IPO, there are other rounds of money that happen before you get to IPO. The reality is that a lot of those fund managers don't have enough relationship or management of all the other series of rounds of capital to be able to get you from pre-seed to IPO. They will not tell you that. They don't talk about that, but I'm going to say it. I think it's fundamentally a part of the problem as well. So everybody gets so gassed up of like, oh, I'm going to go and get this venture fund, and that person writes them, you know, maybe a $200,000 check or something like that with the intention that we're going to grow this company and we're going to go and find another firm that's going to put more money in and then exit us out of that money and so forth. You have to have relationship to those other firms, and those people all know each other. And at that point, you're iced out. If you are a fund manager of color or a manager that does not have all the relationship capital, you could be bringing in your companies into a world that they're not going to succeed in. And as folks, when we're talking about power, I want you to know that. I want you to hear that from me, because you should be asking, what's your success rate in getting this, moving it forward? If they don't have that level of success rate and they don't have those relationships, it doesn't matter. That capital's not going to be for you, because you're going to still be out there huffing and puffing and trying to get it done for the next rounds of money, because you've got to still solve for the pressure that that particular fund is putting on you to return that capital. And so this whole sort of a piece of this, as if it's like this magical world where you get a little bit of money and then all of a sudden you can just, you can just IPO, or you can just go straight to acquisition. The people who I know who are really successful at this already have those relationships baked in. So if they're going to say that they want you to do an acquisition, let's say in the beauty industry, they already have a relationship to who's going to purchase it. Before they even give you that money, they know where they're going to sell. And so if they can't demonstrate that and talk to you about that, leave the money behind. Thanks.
Oh my gosh. Listen, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Kwam. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, everyone that stepped in. I just want to say, as an extra thank you to those who were here on both days. Thank you to anyone who stepped into any of the Fishbowls. We are really excited about this technology of how to have conversations. We hope you take it away. Come and talk to Astrid. She does it all the time. Come and talk to Jessica. She does it all the time. But take this meeting technology with you, because this is the kind of conversation that's going to get us not only the tech we want, but the future we want, that allows for all of the thinking, all of the thoughts, all of the wisdom in the room, and not this sort of sage on a stage bullshit that we all know is bullshit. So, you know. So anyway, thank you everyone for coming out to the Lighthouse 2026.